Hi, everyone. Welcome to childbirthwithgrace.tv. Oh, I think I cut myself off now. Let's start all over again. Hi, everyone. Welcome to childbirthwithgrace.tv. I'm your host, Elia Blandina, and my intention, as always, is to awaken your life power to your best possible birth journey. Today, I have a special guest. Her name's Shelby Shankland. You get to say hello. Say hello.
Hello.
Shelby. Shelby is a life coach and an energy worker, project manager, and flutist. She started her career as a postpartum doula and lactation counselor. Shelby is deeply committed to assisting women in their journey into motherhood and beyond. She helps mothers align their thinking, actions, and heart towards a path of fulfillment and joy. She believes that a woman's experience in childbirth is important and that it is a sacred and holy moment in every woman's life. Shelby is an advocate for keeping mama and baby skin to skin for as long as possible after birth and for treating women with respect, calm, and care during the birth, no matter what is happening. She is also dedicated to assisting women with processing traumatic childbirths in her coaching practice, as she has had 2 births herself and came to know how important this work is. After living in San Francisco for most of her adult life, she moved to East Tennessee with her husband and her 2 kiddos, Zoe and Jack, who we may see come in and out of the frame. We'll see how we do today. And you can reach her at her website, shelbyshankland.wordpress.com. And that'll be in the description down below in the video when we're done. So welcome, Shelby, to childbirthwithgrace.tv.
Thank you.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
With your beautiful porch. So I had read one of your blog posts, and I just want to take a minute and read a quote to sort of go into our discussion. And first of all, what's really neat about Shelby is if you're really connected to the birthing community and watched, especially my first book review, where I discussed how the first childbirth preparation book I've read when I was pregnant with my first baby was Spiritual Midwifery by Anya McGaskin, who is a midwife who created what's known as the farm in Tennessee, where women can go, and women and their families can go and give birth in the most natural way possible. So a quote from Shelby in a blog post, which was really neat, is she said, the original farmies came here to create an intentional community, one where everyone supported everyone else, where 4 to 5 families lived all under one roof, where love was the abiding doctrine, but not in the hippie summer of love kind of way that you might expect, but and that birth was a sacrament. So a spiritual energy, the spiritual energy there is palpable, and the container for challenging personal growth is forgiving yet impenetrable. It was the perfect place to walk through the waiting and then to bring my second born birth side. So with that quote, we're gonna talk with Shelby, because she had the wonderful opportunity of actually deciding to give birth at the farm with her second baby. And so, Shelby, tell us how that came about.
Yeah, it was a hard but easy decision. So my first daughter was born in 2007. when I lived in San Francisco. And I went with a midwifery practice in a hospital. And it was the most natural friendly, lowest C-section rate choice that I could have made and still been in a hospital. Unfortunately, I was one of the cases that had a lot of the special special circumstances that can happen in pregnancy. I was diagnosed as gestational diabetic late in my pregnancy, and then I was GBS positive, and then I had prolonged rupture of membranes. And that happened at about 42 weeks. So I went post-dates with all of those fun things. So through that whole process, I was highly educated. I had really armed myself with information. I had a wonderful childbirth educator that became my doula, and was really just amazing, just facts-based, evidence-based. I could ask her for statistics and she knew them off the top of her head. So she really helped me. She helped to educate me about what my options were. I had already signed some modified protocols for the GBS positive diagnosis and, you know, what would happen if I had prolonged rupture of membranes, which I ended up having, which allowed me to go into the hospital every 8 hours instead of every 4, and after 18 hours of having my membranes ruptured. So, but through all that process and going post-dates, and then, you know, I got through transition in the car on the way to the hospital. I got to the hospital and stalled out. Not all that surprising. I pushed for 6 hours. I ended up with an internal fetal monitor. And it was just, I ended up having the most anxiety ridden OB in the practice on the floor that day. And the midwives did a really excellent job of reporting to her every 30 minutes, the whole time I was there, from 5 in the morning until Zoe was born around 5 at night. They kept her at bay until the last few hours, and then I was given the choice of a C-section or a vacuum in the OR, and I chose the vacuum, and they got her out. She was very big. She was 10 pounds, 13 ounces, but my husband was 10 pounds, 11 ounces. I was 9.5 pounds when we were born, so this was not all that surprising to me. And then I had a retained placenta, and ended up going through all of that without any drugs, and then taking a spinal for the manual extraction of the placenta. But I think that so I signed 5 against my medical advice waivers during that experience. I really fought for the birth that I wanted. And I felt really triumphant, you know, when she was born vaginally. In the moments after, I was like, yes, I did it. But she was taken away from me immediately. My husband went with her along with one of the midwives, and she came back to me quickly, but still, you know, there was no skin to skin immediately afterward. And I think that the most impactful thing about the experience was that my experience in the OR with the vacuum extraction and the retained placenta was one of extreme anxiety and fear. My OB was literally screaming at my midwives for suprapubic pressure and fundal pressure to try to help make room for the baby and help her get the baby out. And, you know, all of those same things could have been done without screaming and without the panicked feeling in the room. And, you know, while I felt triumphant immediately after, you know, as time went on, I was looking back at it, and it just made me more and more sad. You know, yes, I got a vaginal birth as opposed to a C-section, but I had partial 4th-degree tears, and it took me 3 months to heal. You know, it was not the gentle birth that I had imagined, even though I had tried so hard and I had really set myself up and chosen my care provider and all of that. So I had that experience. And then when my daughter was 3, we moved to Tennessee. And when we were moving here, you know, all of my birthy friends, I used to manage a natural parenting store in San Francisco, and all of my friends from there were like, oh, you can have your next baby at the farm. And I was like, that is 4.5 hours away from where I'm going to be living. Like, that's not as easy as you might think. And I really, like, I was excited that there was a birth center here. And I thought that when I got pregnant with my next baby, that I would certainly go to this birth center. And then I got pregnant. And then it became abundantly clear almost immediately that there was no way I was going to birth my baby anywhere where the hospital that was backing whomever, whether it be the birth center or home birth midwife or whatever, where the hospital where I may end up, given my first time, you know, this was not an unreasonable thing to think about. I didn't want to go to a hospital that wasn't going to be supportive of a gentle and calm environment. And at that time, I had no confidence that I was going to get that here, and frankly had developed a bit of a fear of white coats. You know, I went in for an ultrasound during my second pregnancy because I was having some pain. And my blood pressure was so high just being in that office. It had just really created a trauma response in me whenever I was around doctors that had anything to do with my pregnancy. So I decided to go to the farm because that's my best bet at getting the gentle birth that I wanted. And I went for prenatal visits about every 8 weeks. And then as we got closer, it was about every 3 weeks. Usually my husband would come with me, or my husband and daughter. I think maybe once I went by myself. And I would meet with Pamela Hunt. She was my midwife, and she was fantastic. And
so let me just ask you a quick question. So, so what I hear is, so you moved over, everyone told you about the farm, which was really great, and then you thought, oh, maybe not, but then I guess in your research of the area, you found that the hospital, how did you find that out, that the hospital wasn't in alignment with how you wanted to give birth?
You know, the hospital that was backing the birth center at that time was just coming along. They were just starting to have a culture of more natural births in their hospital. There was another hospital in the area that has a midwifery practice that is very practiced in the area of natural childbirth, but I would have to be in a hospital.
Right, and you wanted to change that scenario, the energy.
Yes, yes, and the hospital.
And I agree. I mean, even in my personal situation, I've had four kids, so each birth was always planned at a birth center, and the first 2 I had to be transferred to the hospital. Still had a vaginal delivery, but that one baby that where I lived in Winder, Georgia, so it was very limited. The care was limited. It was a very small town, but luckily a friend of mine was a midwife there, but she didn't practice from a birth center. She practiced from the hospital, and so go figure. I, instead of needing to be transferred to a hospital, I ended up needing a C-section because he was a surprise breech, and that's another topic that we can talk about. But I know exactly what you're talking about, where you know, you wanna, it's sort of like you plan for a certain way, and things sort of happen, and you end up it shifts. And so, yeah, that's why my last baby, I'm like, okay, if everything shifts a little bit, then I'm going to start off with wanting to deliver at home. So that way, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a mindset. It's also you want to be in control. And when, unfortunately, there's not enough education out there. And that's why I'm doing these shows. And the way I do my practice now, I'm a midwife, but now I'm coaching women to emotionally prepare for pregnancy and how to create their environment that's going to be emotionally supporting what they want to do. I think that's, as you probably would agree with me, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, yet one of the biggest, I think that's the most important part of childbirth education. I think, I think we need to get away so much from the mechanics of it all.
Yeah.
And more into the spiritual nature of birth. And I think if we get, as women, you're doing your part, I'm doing my part, there's many people doing their part, that as women, as we keep talking about it, creating a sense of that it is a spiritual, it is a sacred experience, sometimes one in a lifetime experience. Sometimes I was very fortunate, I had 4. You had 2. We're going to talk about your second birth in a minute at the farm, but also, some women don't even get a chance or choose not to have children. That's fine too. But I think that's the whole point, is that you choose to, and it's one thing to choose, and I'm sure you would agree with that. It's one thing to choose your how you want to give birth, and then it's another thing to mentally prepare for how to give birth in as least stress internal environment as possible, because when we're stressed, all the stress hormones are actually anti-birth hormones. Because back in when we were living outside in tribes, you wouldn't go into birth if there was a threat on your community, and that's for a reason.
Yeah.
And so you really have to be held in a very loved and sacred open space for those stress hormones to be lowered in your body, and then have their natural oxytocin hormones, which is the same medicine that they use to start your labor, but you have it in your body and to raise, and then therefore feel like, okay, it's safe to give birth. So I think, overall, I think that's our goal by telling our stories, not to scare anyone, but to tell our stories and how we overcame and are helping others to set their path in the direction that they want to go. So so then you got to the farm. How awesome. That's how I met. By the way, everyone, I met Shelby because she's a really great friend of Tammy Marshall, who we did an interview about how to eat well during pregnancy, and you can catch that on my channel. But Shelby, wow, you got to birth at the farm.
I did.
Yeah. So tell us how that went.
So it was a completely different experience, of course. I started my pregnancy at about, I think into my second trimester. I just started eating as if I was a gestational diabetic to avoid the diagnosis. This was a decision that my midwife and I made together, that this is just what we would do. I could still prick my fingers. I still had all that stuff. So I tested my sugars along the way. And then at 38 weeks, so mind you, my first was born at 42 weeks and a day. And this time I wasn't even going to go to the farm until I was 40 weeks, because we figured it's going to be a while. But at 38 weeks, I started having, go ahead.
And the farm was 4 hours away. Let's
4.5 hours away. Mm-hmm.
Let's put that in the story here.
Yes, 4.5 hours away on my second baby. So, and my first labor was 16 hours long. So not horribly long for a first timer. Yeah. So, I talked to my midwife at the farm and my friend who had been my doula, who is now a home birth midwife and a local home birth midwife. And with the consensus was, if you want to have this baby at the farm, you better pack your stuff up and go, because it looks like things might be happening. I mean, we can't know, but if you want to be safe. So we packed up my 4-year-old daughter and our car shock carrier full of our life. I do not travel lightly. And drove out to the farm and waited. I guess because you thought you were in labor? Well, I thought that I was close. Okay. I thought that I was close to going into labor. And I got there and nothing happened. Nothing. I walked, I had sex, I walked some more, I swung on swings, I walked up and down the stairs sideways, I squatted, I rolled on the birth ball, I had sex some more. And nothing was doing. And this was, I got to 42 weeks and, Pamela and I are talking. And it was a striking difference. The first time around, I was kind of fighting the establishment. I was fighting the man, and they were always, I would go in for an NST at the hospital, a non-stress test, and they would say, oh, so you're here for your induction. And I'd say, no, I'm here for my non-stress test. Give me the paperwork. I'm going home. And I would fight that battle. Every time I went in, they would tell me how I was putting my baby at risk and blah, 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 and all of that. And this time I'm sitting with me and Pamela, and we're talking about what our options are. And I think it was at 42 plus a couple days that she said to me, we could go to the birth center in town and we could do a non-stress test, if you want. And I said, well, what information is that going to give you that you don't already know, having birthed over 1,000 babies? We know that I'm okay. I know that I'm okay. I know that the baby's okay. And so do you. So why would we go do that? So I waited, and then finally my waters broke in the middle of the night. Wasn't in labor yet. So again, I had pre-labor rupture of membranes. About 10 hours later, I took some homeopathic cohosh and went for a walk in the rain with my family. Got back to the cabin, and Pamela was on my porch saying, okay, it's time to get this party started, with a bag of pennyroyal. And we started with some pennyroyal tea. I had a couple cups of pennyroyal tea, and that started getting things moving. And I actually had early labor this time, which I hadn't had my first time around, which was nice. We kind of hung around at the cabin, and to back up a little bit, my best friend had come out to be at the birth of my son, and she hung around for a month, for 4 weeks away from her family, and nothing ever happened. And so she had to go home. So as a result of that, I needed another midwife's assistant to be there to take care of Zoe. So when I went into early labor, she came over. And my midwife was there, and we kind of hung out, had dinner. And when Zoe went to bed upstairs, that's when I started to go into active labor. That was about at 8:30 at night. So then the midwife's assistant came. So we had two assistants there and my midwife. I was in active labor for a couple of hours. Things moved very quickly for me. I got into the tub, and I was on kind of leaning over the edge of the tub on my knees. And right about the time I started pushing, the second midwife arrived. So it was Pamela and Stacy. And so I pushed for about 45 minutes, and I got his head out.
Nice.
And it was so.
As opposed to the first one, 6 hours.
6 hours, right. And I was so thrilled to have his head out. And I felt like I did it. I got his head out.
Yay.
And then nothing. And then nothing. And then I heard the voice from over my shoulder going, okay, Shelby, we're going to need you to flip over. And at that, I knew what was happening. I knew that he was stuck. And this was the Gaskin maneuver in reverse. So the Gaskin maneuver that you read about is like you're laying back and they have you turn over onto all fours. I was already on all fours, so they had me spin over around onto my back. So it can work either way.
Yeah, you change the position.
Right. So I had the Gaskin maneuver on the farm, on Anime Gaskin's farm, which is kind of cool. The midwife, Stacy, took her socks off and hopped into the birth tub fully clothed, but she remembered to take her socks off. And she hooked her finger under Jack's armpit and pulled him out. And he was blue and floppy. And he wasn't breathing, didn't start breathing. So they cut the cord and started neonatal resuscitation. They took him to the room, the next room right next to me, and started working on him while I sat in the tub and waited for my placenta. And, you know, the bonus to this is that because my best friend wasn't there, we had 2 midwives assistants. So one could be with me and one could be with Pamela counting compressions. And she had been a labor and delivery nurse, so this was familiar to her. Yes. Yeah. So everything happens as it should, right? My best friend wasn't there, but it was the best thing. It's what we needed. I started to hemorrhage because my placenta was not coming. I had to climb out of the tub, and they leaned me up a flight of stairs and hung a bag of Pitocin on the curtain rod. And got me going with that. It did not come, and so Stacy had to do a manual extraction of the placenta, but it was right there. Like, I don't remember feeling anything. She was very, very gentle. And then after 10 minutes, they got Jack breathing. And I...
Breathing on his own. So
breathing on his own. Yeah.
Let's clarify that.
Right. They were giving him oxygen and the bag and compressing, and so, and then it took me a little while to get over the bed because I had lost a bit of blood. And I just couldn't go like vertical without feeling like I was going to pass out. And I got over to the bed, and things were good. He started crying and wouldn't stop crying. And they had gone over also while this was all happening. One of the midwives assistants had walked into, like, they were calling one of the other midwives who was, what do they call him? She was a nurse in the NICU. Oh, okay. At Vandy. Yeah. So she was a midwife at the farm, but she was also a nurse, a NICU nurse at Vandy. So they called her, and she came over also and monitoring, to assess the baby.
So I mean, they're really well connected. It's
oh my God!
Let's and I'm going to interject for just a second, so that because everyone's listening to the story, and I could hear my colleagues out there yapping in my head. But basically, the farm's been there since, 1971, I think, and they've established themselves really well in the community. So they have a lot of backup, and as you hear with the story, a lot of people hold dual positions where they're out in the modern world doing their high-level tech job in the field of birthing, and then they bring their skills to this wonderful world of home birth situated in the farm. So it's really the best of both worlds, especially for women who choose to be out in a very natural environment to give birth. So with that being said, and there is a doctor, of course, that is on call for the farm too as well. I mean, they can get it yourself. No. I mean, it's a ways to the hospital. I mean, it's a ways, but
But an ambulance can get there in about 20 minutes, which is a
Yeah.
long time, but they're equipped. You know, they have their neonatal resuscitation training every 6 months.
Yeah, which, by the way,
so comes down from Vandy and does that training.
Vandy being Vanderbilt, you know, so
Yes.
they're very well. And so to give our viewers perspective, if you are in the nursing field, obstetric field, that kind of thing, neonatal resuscitation, it's a certification that is required to be renewed every 2 years by those who work in the hospital. So every 2 years by those who work in the hospital. And here, it's every 6 months. So they're pretty up to date and practice. Because, you know, generally speaking, in home birth, you know, it's not as dramatic from that perspective like Shelby had experienced. But her experience shows how well prepared they are to manage.
Absolutely.
And how really most, you do your research, but all the people that I've met out there that have done home deliveries, including local midwives here that I know, they keep themselves pretty up to date and know exactly what they need to do. So go ahead, Shelby. Keep going.
Yeah, and through the whole experience, I mean, this is pretty harrowing.
Yeah.
And my husband, I mean, promptly we arranged that we would not have any more children after this. Because it was really hard on him both times, but especially the second time. I mean, he's it was pretty challenging for him. But during the whole scene, everyone was so calm and so respectful of the birth space, even though stuff was going down. I mean, there were emergency situations. But everyone remained calm. They were checking it. Scott was there the whole time, and they were always, you know, doing there with him.
And staying calm. Yeah, there's no reason to get all. You know, the thing is, I don't want to come off as putting down anyone or being negative, but basically it's just a matter of how comfortable you are in your skills, and not just that, but fear, how you manage fear. Because as a practitioner, I myself, having been involved in over 5,000 births, I mean, things do happen eventually, and surprises do happen. But I learned very quickly early on, because my initial nursing experience was in the ICU, so I got exposed to all kinds of interesting things, is that, you know, you have to stay calm and be the anchor and just do what you need to do to help the people. But staying calm is probably the biggest thing, and that's I think the big challenge as well, is not only helping women prepare, but also helping the first responders and as one of my friends who's a midwife, she says, you know, not only trauma work for the women who experience interesting births and they're still trying to process what happened, but also for the practitioners that have to deal with the traumatic birth experience, and they have to process
absolutely
as well. And so that's one question I want to ask you, Shelby. So I know one of the things, like Tammy had said, that you did some tapping with her to help process your memories of your birth, and that's why you're able to talk about it very calmly, and it's not a triggering memory. It's just, this is what happened, and I worked through it. And so how was your experience with that?
Just processing
using tapping to process.
I actually I didn't come upon Tammy until I had pretty well I had done a lot of processing around this birth. What I went through with her was tapping on my own birth experience of me being born.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because
Nice.
my mom, I was born in 73, but my sisters are 11 and 13 years older than I am. So when she had them, it was twilight. And when she had me, the doctor wanted to give her an epidural, and she said she was not having it. She was like, I want to be under. Give me the stuff.
Oh, because she was used to the
Because
twilight.
that's what she had done.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So when I was born, I know that she was asleep, and that I, like any other baby of a twilight mama, was, helped out by a nurse or a doctor and taken off to the nursery in your box, swaddled up.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, that's among, there are other reasons too,
Sure.
why I'm such an advocate of skin to skin.
Mm-hmm.
Mama's body is baby's natural habitat. So to take a baby away from that after just being born, which is the equivalent of like running a marathon and a triathlon, like back to back, it's a pretty hefty effort. And then they're taken away from everything that they've ever known. So I tapped with her on that because I couldn't, it was deeply disturbing to me to know that my first experiences out in the world were alone.
Yeah.
In a box.
In a box. Yeah.
So I did work with her on that.
A lot of metaphors there.
Yeah. Yeah. So we did work on that, and that was amazing. Like, I really couldn't talk about that whole experience of being born myself without it being very emotionally triggering, and without that, fear of being alone being triggered. It's a real one for me. And now, we kind of we did the matrix re-imprinting with that, and now I have a totally different feeling and story around it when I talk about it. Perfect. So the facts are still somewhat the same, but the feeling around it is much different. With the birth, with the farm birth, and having it be so challenging with Jack, that was definitely, I needed to be really gentle with myself, because I had done my best. And that was my saving grace, was to know that I had absolutely done everything that I possibly could have done to get a gentle birth for me and for my son. And it didn't happen that way, and it wasn't in the cards for me. And that was a grieving process, that I was never going to have that moment of, the birth tub, home birth mamas, where they bring their babies up and laughing, crying, I did it, babies on my chest. That's not in the cards for me. It's not my story. And so I allowed myself to grieve, and I allowed that to be okay. I birthed on the farm. Yes, it was wonderful in so many ways. But, it still wasn't what I pictured. It wasn't what I dreamed of for myself and my family. And so I allowed that to be. I allowed myself to have my feelings about it when I had them. And I talked to my midwife about it. And I talked to my midwife friend in San Francisco about it. And I told my birth story so many times, to speak it out loud, and really made an effort to look at all of the beautiful, great things about that birth, because there were many beyond what I've talked about here. I mean, if you ever do watch the documentary Birth Story, that's about birthing at the farm, there's a woman who sings bluegrass in some of the background, and her name is Marilyn. She's one of the original farmies. And when Jack was born, we found out later that he had swallowed a lot of air and water on his way out. So his tummy was really upset for a while, until he pooped, which was about 7 hours later. So he was an unhappy baby for the first little while, and she took him into the next room, to give me a rest, to let me sleep for a few hours. After I had been with him for a few hours, she took him away, and she was in the next room, laying face to face with him on their sides on the futon, and she sang to him for hours. I fell asleep to the sound of her singing to my son, and I woke up to the sound of her singing to my son. And 3 days later, when she came to visit us, he smiled for the first time when he heard her voice.
Oh, my Lord.
I mean, it was so beautiful. I will remember her for the rest of my life, and what a special gift she gave to us. And especially to my son, just being present with him for the first 7 hours of his life that he was hurting, and was experiencing pain that he had not experienced in this lifetime. So there are so many beautiful things that happened out of that, and that I'm so grateful for. And among them, I did not have that savior birth experience. I didn't have what I so desired. And still, I'm okay. And I've come through it. And I know how I did that. So I get to help other women who have experienced something similar. And that is the true gift for me. That's the biggest gift for me.
Absolutely.
I'm thankful for those difficulties in my birth experiences so that I can, be relatable and, say with some amount of credibility that, you can come out on the other side of this, and it's okay to have the feelings that you have about it. Even if you didn't have the harrowing experience that I had, even if somebody didn't treat you with respect and made you feel uncomfortable or bad during your birth experience, and that really affected you, you get to have feelings about that.
Yeah. And I want to quote you again from the same blog post at this time, because this fits right in. And you had put down at the end of the blog post, so the next time someone shares a birth story with you that indicates mama may not have been held in that space of love during her delivery, or she may have had some trauma during her childbirth experience, I ask you to hold off on the quote, healthy mama and healthy baby commentary. Honor her experience by validating her feelings and holding her hand. Healthy mamas and healthy babies are wonderful, but a mama's loss of belief in her body or invalidation of her trauma by the people closest to her can cause a ripple effect that will be felt for years to come. Honor the mother, because in many ways it is through her heart that her family will gather its strength, and the shockwave of that strength and love will be felt for lifetimes to come. And with that being said, that's just so important. And not only is it that others say, healthy mama, healthy baby, is also, we do it to ourselves,
Yes.
In the process of reviewing how the birth went. And like with me, my story is my third baby was breech, and I needed the C-section, even though I was like 9 centimeters, almost about to push him out. And it just so happened that the doctor didn't know how to do breeches, and there's always this little voice says, yeah, but he's 19 now, he's doing great and whatever. There's always that, the grieving process. I remember the next morning, my friend who was my midwife, we both went to graduate school together. So that's how well we knew each other, and she was the one that was attending me. But we both, sat and cried about it, that we as two women helping each other. She was my midwife, I'm her friend, I'm her client. We didn't get the birth experience we wanted, let alone But it's how it is, and it's just one of those things where you just have to say, yeah, we didn't get it, and I've done tapping around that, and actually did rebirthing, and did get in the energetic field. I did get the birth that I wanted, and I put that energy in there of, instead of feeling disappointed and not connected with that baby, I actually put in the energy of being connected, and resolved on resolve the effects of the negative energy. Because really, that's what when something like that happens to you, your body creates this little trauma bubble that puts all the characteristics of the feelings that you were experiencing at that time, and puts it there to protect you, so that if those kind of feelings start creeping up again, you could sort of be on guard. And the idea with tapping is that you release that, because it's already happened. You don't have to carry it. It's not like it's not like how to defend yourself against a tiger. It's not something that's going to kill you, but still your body responds to it the same way. So what you want to do is release the negative, and then find what was the positive, and really amplify the positive of it all. And you could even imagine it having been the positive experience that you wanted, and then amplify the feeling of that, and then therefore you just change the dynamics of that memory of how it affects you now in the present. So with that being said, Shelby, tell us a little bit, how do you think women can best affect their birth experience and get what they want?
So I think that the number one, numero uno thing that women can do to really help themselves is to choose their care provider wisely. That's the first thing.
Step one.
For
example, if you want to VBAC, make sure the person you're going to does VBACs. I mean, don't make the assumption that they will. Another thing is, if you are willing to have a vaginal birth, breech birth, do they know how to do that? And that's talk about.
And will they allow it?
No, they will. No, if they do it, they'll allow it.
Right.
Yeah. But my point is that talk about a skill that's slowly vanishing. There's this really great documentary. It's not out on DVD yet, but it's like on Premiere, whatever it's called, Heads Up, and it's all about a documentary about a doctor who does 2 breech deliveries and how it's a dying art form, so he's trying to revive it before he retires. So that's just, and there's always that one doctor in most communities that it's the go-to guy for breech delivery. So just be open. You could have a doctor or a midwife, whatever, and they're back. And if you go to a midwife, who's their backup? Those are all things you have to investigate ahead of time.
Yeah.
And because it all depends on what state you are too, what the laws are.
Right.
Yeah,
and I think that it's really important, even if you're choosing a midwifery model in a hospital, know what the hospital's culture is, because no matter what, if you have the one natural friendly OB in that hospital, and those nurses are only used to seeing medicated births, and you're looking for a natural childbirth, the nurses are the ones that are going to be there with you. Even if you have a doula, the nurses are the ones that are going to be kind of driving the nurses, and whoever is on staff are the ones you're going to feel their energy around it.
Absolutely.
They think that you're being ridiculous by not taking the epidural. Even if they don't overtly say something, you're going to feel it, because when you're in that birth space, and why it is so important to have that calm.
We're talking about that.
You know,
that's absolutely, that is like,
you're so wide open. You're so wide open in that space.
And that, I'm glad you put it in those words. You're wide open in that space. And you're supposed to be wide open in that
You need to be wide open.
Okay? For the baby to come through. But then if the energetics of the space is one that's constricted, are we maybe onto something?
Mm-hmm.
If the energy of the space that you're going to have the baby is constricted, maybe the pelvis constricts. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. This is just a conversation here.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking back at all the different births and all the different hospitals I was in, and you know, nothing against the people that I worked with at all, because everyone's doing the best they can.
Absolutely.
But, oof, wow, what a concept. Let's just think about that. You're in an expanded space when you're in childbirth. Mm-hmm. And if you enter a space that's constricted or limited, whether it's energetically or physically or whatever, you know, that's why labor stops, you know, because your body senses it. Your
body senses the fear.
Yeah,
and and that should have.
That goes along with the whole biology of belief, or if you guys start reading the book, Bruce Lipton, every single cell in your body, the membranes is what is actually picking up signals that you don't even see. We all have spider sense.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, I talk to women who are going in for non-stress tests, and it's like, just put yourself in a bubble. And if you need somebody to come and help you stay in that bubble, have somebody there to support you to stay in that happy, calm, peace bubble. Because if the NST results are not perfect, chances are, depending on who you're talking to, you may get somebody who's really pressuring you to do something that you don't want to do, or is really feeling like you're not making smart decisions. And, you know, I am not saying that every woman should go out there and try to have the same kind of birth that I had. I'm not saying that every woman should not have an epidural, or it should go have home births or unassisted births or any of that. I mean, we're all different. Yeah. We all make choices based on good information. And I will say my experience of choosing my care provider the second time was directly informed by my baby. I was going to have a birth center for birth. As soon as I became pregnant with Jack, there was no way that was going to be acceptable. And I waited, like I kept my options open. Like I kind of thought that that's where it was going to go, but I knew innately to just wait until I was actually pregnant, because there are planners, you know, they're the type A planners, people, of which I have been one, who really want to have it all laid out. But you know, when you have that other soul traveling with you, there's information at your disposal there, and there's intuition that's stronger than ever before. And listen to that. Listen.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really great point, Shelby, because it's, to me, I always felt like when I was pregnant, I was the closest ever to God and source.
No, absolutely.
While being pregnant, and I think that's
because your baby is still across the veil.
Yeah,
until
exactly.
Point,
the baby's still across the veil, even though you feel all the movement and all that. You have to hold that.
They're so connected. Yeah.
Ooh, and listen to what you know. It's like you could say it's your gut feeling, but well, your baby's right there next to your gut. So I can still say that, but it's actually coming from the baby, and you know how things should go about. And you know, and of course, again, putting it out there. Not that non-stress tests are terrible. I had one client who failed her non-stress tests. It was a bad tracing, and needed a C-section, and it ended up being, that was how it was supposed to be, because when the baby came out, it had such a long cord that it had 2 knots and around the baby like 5 times.
Wow.
So, of course, so there's a time for technology, and you're going to be I think what we need to do is put it out there that, hey, let please Spirit guide us to the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Us.
Yeah.
And in her case, any labor would have cut off the oxygen supply to the baby, and that's it. So, the thing is, it's all tools. That's what we're trying to stress is when you're doing an ultrasound, when you're doing whatever you choose to do, whatever diagnostic test you choose to do, is one, just always be aware it is a choice, even though it may be presented to you as a non-choice. But two, it's information to just make sure everything's going well. So, as long as it's not invasive. I always told my clients, it's not invasive. You get to see your baby. What's the harm? I mean, the only, of course, if we find something absolutely crazy, which we hope not to find, and most of the time you don't. So, it's all up to you. It's all whatever you're wanting to do. I think that's the main message. Okay, so the most important thing is research your hospital, research your provider,
listen to your gut, right?
Listen to your baby and your gut.
Listen to your gut, and acknowledge any fears.
Now that's there you go.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because no matter what you do, it's like that. The very first episode that I did, it called "Why Birth Plans Don't Work," and you could look it up on the YouTube channel. Is because you're so busy creating all this list, especially us type A people, right?
Yes.
All this list, and then you forget to listen to you forget how to state it. First of all, always make your list in a positive statement.
Absolutely.
And if you can't say it in a positive, you need to figure out, okay, why do I keep saying I don't want this and I don't want that? Really look into what's the energetics behind, what's the fear based thinking that's making you really focus in on that. And I think tapping and matrix imprinting, and there's a lot of other energetics kind of things that you can do, can help you adjust how you're thinking and your belief system regarding that. So that's, I think, as well, in my list, I think that's number one for me, because just in case you don't have a choice, sometimes you're in a community that's very limited as to who does births. So you don't, unless you're going to make the choice, okay, I'm going to move, and find the right person. Then if you're in a situation where, hey, this is the only person in town, whatever, then the number one thing to do is really learn how to clear out all the negative feelings you have about your birth ahead of time. So, because what you keep thinking about ends up happening because you keep focusing in on that. And so what you want to do is deal with the fear, so that way you could be relaxed and just focus in on what you want, as opposed to what you're afraid of. So that's super important. And what else, Shelby? So many wonderful nuggets here.
I think that those are really, I mean, going back to, and then you said something there that triggered something for me, is that don't limit yourself. When you're thinking about how you want to set up your birth experience. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, well, I can't afford a doula. I can't afford a doula. Well, you know what? There are doulas in training who will do it for free or cheap. Or there's Christmas or birthdays where you can ask for money for your doula. Or, there's somebody that really wants to give you something awesome for, you have baby showers. Just give me money so I can pay my doula.
Fund my doula.
Yeah, where there's a will, there's a way. I also counseled a friend of mine who, lived kind of far out from a hospital. And she wanted to have a home birth, but she didn't feel comfortable being that far away from the hospital. So she started to rule it out. And I said, well, do you have a friend that lives close to the hospital where you would feel comfortable? Would they, do they have a parents home that they could go to so that you could go with your husband and, your first child and camp out, when you start to feel like things are happening, and, make it your space, make it comfortable and have your home birth there? Or is there a home birth midwife who has a birthing cabin that's closer to the hospital? Like, there are so many different ways that you can set things up. If you really are having a gut feeling like, I want a home birth, but I need to be close to a hospital, there's a way to make that happen. There is. If you believe there is, there absolutely is.
there absolutely is. And that's I think that's a big take home, is that if your body's and your baby's telling you this is how I should go, just listen to it. Investigate it.
I mean, my goodness, if you had said, and people had said, go have your baby at the farm, I was like, how am I going to do what? How am I going to do that? I mean, first of all, there's the expense of a home birth midwife that my insurance is not going to cover. There's the expense of housing there that, we're not made of money here. We have jobs. How are we going to get away for however long it takes to have a baby out there when there's not, at the time, it's gotten better, but there wasn't great Wi-Fi out there. It existed, but only one computer at a time and with a lot of patience. So I did not know how that was going to happen. I had no idea how that was going to be possible, but it all lined up and it was perfect. And we were living at the farm for 6 weeks, and we did not drown financially, and we were able
to. It was like heaven.
Yeah. Well, parts of it were really wonderful and like heaven, but, waiting till 43 weeks to have your baby.
Oh, what a great experience, though.
It was. Yeah. Well, and that spiritual container, that bowl of the farm, it really did play a part in my birth experience. I mean, I did on more than one occasion stand on the porch of our cabin and scream and cry into the woods. Because I just wanted my baby to be born and not to be a toddler before it came out.
How much did he weigh, by the way?
He was 10 pounds, 3 ounces.
Compared to your first baby, how much?
10 pounds, 13 ounces.
So he was smaller.
He was smaller. Yeah. Yeah. He was smaller. But still, I make him big.
Still, yes. Yeah. But that's your genetics.
Yeah. I knew that was going to be.
You do. I mean,
yeah. And I wasn't afraid of that. It wasn't something that scared me. Yeah. I'm not a small person. I do not have petite hips.
Those Nordic genes.
Right.
All right. Well, it was wonderful talking with you, Shelby.
Thank you.
And you can reach Shelby again. Her website, I'm gonna bring it up here again, at shelbyshankland.wordpress.com. It'll be in the description section below the video at the end here. And I just wanted to thank you for hanging out. If you got here all the way to the end with us, it was a wonderful conversation of how to honor the spiritual part of giving birth and how to make that happen for yourself. And I want to invite you to join us next week. I will be on vacation for the next few weeks. My family and I are going to be driving all the way up to Niagara Falls and visiting all kinds of really cool places. And I'm going to take you along with me. So next week, I hope to be doing this chat at a alpaca farm. So that's going to be fun. So So yeah, stay tuned. I'm going to take you traveling, virtual traveling. I'm going to try my hand at using Blab, I think. So we'll see how that works out. And also, in between, depending on what's going on, I'm also going to try out the Facebook Live app. And just sort of fiddle about with that as we're traveling around, and we'll go over, we'll see what spirit has to say when during the traveling, because you just never know. My friend who owns the alpaca farm, he said maybe there's going to be a little baby alpaca being born, so you never know. Maybe we'll witness a little birth live. That'd be fun. That'd be very interesting, wouldn't it? We thought we had it bad. We are round little baby heads coming out.
Right.
All right. And so with that, until next time, keep tapping and let the loving tree of your celestial family be your guide to awaken your life power. Stay present in the moment, enjoy life, and be well. And I will see you next week. Thank you, Shelby, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.